my loves, and welcome back to the Ages of Chaos, this series of appendix videos in which we're taking a look at the individual Traitor Legions and Renegade Warbands as presented in the 9th edition Chaos Space Marine Codex. You know what? You guys really rather liked the Alpha Legion one last time, didn't you? That video did incredibly well. Much more so than all of the others that I've done thus far. I always thought the Alpha Legion one of the less well represented, the less liked, certainly, traitor legions out there, but apparently not. People like that one. I know that last time I said we were probably going to do the Red Corsairs this time. Unfortunately, I just recorded the Red Corsairs and the audio just came out mangled, distorted, and destroyed. It is utterly unsalvageable. So I will do, and I haven't got the heart to go over it again, so I will do the Red Corsairs a little later on. Until then, let's take a look at one of the more interesting traitor legions, shall we? Let's take a look at the Night Lords. The Night Lords, oh my god. Does anyone remember? These guys, the Night Lords were originally introduced way back in the Realms of Chaos days, believe it or not. They were mentioned in the Realms of Chaos books, but like a lot of what would become known as the Undivided Legions, the sort of tertiary traitor legions, outside of the cult legions like the Thousand Sons, the World Eaters, the Emperor's Children, and the Death Guard, the Night Lords weren't given really anything. They were a mention only, and they had a banner in one of the artwork sections of the books, and that was it. I do believe they were loosely categorized as followers of Khorne back then, which they most certainly are not now. Certainly not completely anyway. The Night Lords were really given their big swell in the 2nd edition codex. Here's something funny. Does anyone remember that when the 2nd edition codex was released and when all of the new miniatures were released and you had photographs of the miniatures on the boxes of the miniatures as opposed to artwork like you sometimes get now, the Night Lords were the poster children. All of the miniatures, like the Terminator pack, the old metal Terminators, the plastic Chaos Space Marines, the Chaos Space Marine veteran packs, they were all Night Lords. They were the poster children, which is really strange to think, isn't it? You'd think the Black Legion would be the way to go, but apparently not. It was the Night Lords. And one of the things that the writers of the 2nd Ed Chaos Space Marine Codex really tried to do with the Undivided Legions is demonstrate all of the different paths and extremes that can lead to not necessarily the worship of chaos, but falling to chaos. And the Night Lords really exemplify that, because they are not strictly Chaos Space Marines in the same way that, say, the Black Legion are, or even the Iron Warriors. The Night Lords don't worship anything, by and large. They can fall onto the path that lead to their subsuming into the Chaos powers, sort of like the erosion of their individual wills, and agendas, and ultimately their volition, so they become puppets to the Chaos powers in the same way that anyone can. But that's not a conscious choice by and large when it comes to the Night Lords. They don't worship chaos at all. They regard those who do with cynicism, and that's what they are ultimately. They're one of the nastier forces at large in the universe of Warhammer 40,000, and that's saying something. That really is saying something. Unlike, say, the Word Bearers or even the likes of the Emperor's Children, they don't have ideology at all. They are complete nihilists. They don't care about anything. They don't have any wider ideology or agenda. All they're interested in are the immediate benefits of wreaking havoc and inflicting pain upon their victims. They don't have opponents, they have victims. They are kind of cowardly in a way. They prefer to fight forces that are already hobbled or that are not as powerful as they are, because they are sadists who enjoy the infliction of pain for its own sake and inflicting cruelty and terror upon their victims. They like weaker opponents. And so they're very piratical. They're a bit like the Red Corsairs in that regard. They are a splintered legion. There's no overarching authority amongst the Night Lords, although they can be summoned together under certain circumstances, as is demonstrated in Aaron Dembski Bowden's amazing Night Lords trilogy. If you really want to get a handle of what the Night Lords are like, of how they operate psychologically and politically, pick up those books, because Aaron Dembski Bowden makes a virtue of these characters and their incredibly vile, nihilistic tendencies. Their Primarch, Conrad Kurtz, Night Haunter, he fell on a world called Nostramo, and Nostramo, yeah, that's an Aliens reference, by the way. Nostramo was a world riddled with violence, crime. It was ruled by basically crime families. There was no real authority there, no real sort of like or law and order or police force of any kind. And so Conrad Kurtz became the Night Haunter. Nostromo was characterized by being, it's an industrial world, it's a mining world, and most of the time it's swathed in darkness. There's very little light from its star, and so the people who live there live very short, blunted lives. They're often more or less blind, they can't see very well, and the world is swathed in night. So Conrad Kurtz became the Night Haunter. Unlike other Primarchs who basically became integrated into their societies and rose through the ranks, Night Haunter didn't. He became an individual. He became a vigilante, and in his purview, the only way of imposing order on Nostromo was by making everyone terrified of committing even the slightest infraction. And so that's what he did. He made grisly, sadistic, very public spectacles of anyone who flouted his notion of justice. And as a result, the world came under his control eventually. He eventually became the unquestioned ruler of Nostromo, because no one would dare step out of line, to the point whereby really ridiculous infractions became the basis for death sentences, and not just death sentences, but the most incredible torture, sadism. He made physical spectacles out of those who displeased him. So the streets, he was a bit like Vlad the Impaler. That's how Vlad the Impaler kept his vast empire in line, basically, by making grisly spectacles of anyone who dared defy him. So the streets of Nostromo were lined with gutted, flayed, mutilated bodies. And that's how he maintained rule. And bizarrely, when the Emperor came to Nostromo, he kind of accepted that. He needed someone amongst the Space Marine legions who could keep order in that way. So he wasn't that bothered. He drew Night Haunter into the order of the Great Crusade quite easily. Interestingly, Night Haunter, Conrad Kurtz, was afflicted with visions in the same way that Magnus the Red was, and sanguineous to a certain degree. But unlike those two, Conrad couldn't control his powers. They came in these hideous fits of pain, these seizures that were agonizing, and all they showed him was the darkest of all possible futures. And unlike, say, Magnus the Red or Sanguinius, who used those visions to their advantage, Night Haunter became fatalistic. He became a slave to them, and it's generally regarded that he knew what was going to happen. Like, he knew that the Horus Heresy was going to erupt. He knew that the Imperium was going to turn on itself. He knew that Brother would be obliged to fight Brother, and it would all end in fire and death and misery. He saw that coming, and he just fatalistically surrendered to it rather than trying to do anything about it. Now, his legion, the Night Lords, they adopted his modus operandi and his ideology to the letter, and they became, like him, these monstrous sadists, to the point whereby it would only take the rumour of the Night Lords operating in a particular system to cow planets that were otherwise in rebellion or where there was some disorder. The rumour alone was enough, because they would inflict the most incredible atrocities on anyone who was flouting imperial rule, to the point whereby eventually it became apparent that really the justification of law and order and of maintaining some semblance of stability was ultimately revealed as being a sham. They didn't really care about that. Not really. They were ultimately just monsters. They were just sadists. And that was revealed to Nighthaunter himself at a particular point. And he basically collapsed into insanity, as did the entire Legion. What also happened was his ideology was proved false. So Nostromo, after the Night Lords left to conduct their crusades across the galaxy, fell back into anarchy and crime and was taken over again by the old crime families. So it didn't work. And also, Space Marines were still being fed from Nostromo into the Night Lords. So slowly, over time, the Night Lords were being populated by criminals, by killers, by sadists, by reavers, by monsters effectively, who were then being given the genetic enhancements and the tools of Space Marines. So the Legion was slowly being poisoned from within. That doesn't really matter, to be honest. Nighthaunter's ideology would have poisoned them anyway, as is made evident to him. If you read not only the Night Lords trilogy by Aaron Dembski Bowden, but the Conrad Kurtz book as well, who I think was it Chris Wright or Nick Kime who wrote that one? I can't remember. But in that one, it becomes apparent that Nighthaunter, he does eventually become aware that everything he's ever believed and everything he's ever sold himself to is garbage. It's absolute nonsense, and he is ultimately just a sadist and a monster. He is the worst sinner of all, basically, and that's what makes him collapse into utter, complete suicidal insanity at the end of his life. Assuming that he is dead, I mean, it's generally marketed that Nighthaunter was assassinated by M. Shen, who is an assassin, a Calidus assassin. That's an Apocalypse Now reference, by the way. M. Shen, Michael Sheen, yeah. Michael Sheen's character in Apocalypse Now is sent to assassinate Colonel Kurtz in Vietnam. Yeah, there's a lot of references. There's a lot of literary references in the Night Lords. There's also a Batman thing going on. I mean, ultimately, Nighthaunter, as he operated on Nostromo, is a bit like Batman. It's the Batman ideology carried to extremes, right? But at the end of the heresy, he was ostensibly murdered. There's never been any confirmation that actually happened, but it's likely that it did. It's likely that he was murdered, that he in fact allowed himself to be murdered or martyred under his own terms to try and prove some insane point, to try and he basically said there is a recording that's often quoted that was sort of recorded through the armor of M. Shen when she confronted Nighthaunter, and he talks about how everything she's about to do proves the validity of what he has done, and that death is nothing compared to vindication. Of course, by that point, he was a warp-altered monstrosity. Not a demon prince, not a demon primarch, but still warp-altered and gangrel and gargoyle-like and utterly monstrous. I mean, for God's sake, the palace that he'd made was made of fused and living flesh that was endlessly tormented. So by that point, he'd gone properly over the edge. As a result of that, his legion fractured and ultimately became these scattered warbands, all of which operated according to their own ideologies, that have no cohesive authority or belief system or agenda, but that fight A, to survive as pirates and reavers, and B, just because they like doing it, because they like taking slaves and victims and they like torturing them in the most hideous ways imaginable. Even the Emperor's Children, although they are arguably one of the more sadistic warbands and enjoy inflicting pain on their victims, the Emperor's Children do it out of religious observance. They believe that it's right. They believe that is the truth according to Slanesh, right? The Night Lords don't even believe that. They're just complete cynics and monsters. They are like super-powered, genetically enhanced Ubermensch serial killers who are out there operating beyond any reciprocation, any attempt to rein them in or halt their atrocities. They just don't care. Insofar as they're concerned, the universe is rotten to the core. There is nothing that is good in it, and certainly not them. They are the worst of the worst, and they know it, and they revel in it. They are, in many ways, they are like condensed evil. They are one of the most malevolent forces in the 40k universe, and that is saying something. Given that there are no good guys in the 40k universe, that is saying something. And that lends them a very certain patina. They're very popular, the Night Lords, which makes a lot of sense to me. There's something the fact that they're not enslaved to the Chaos Powers makes them interesting. The fact that they're not enslaved to any particular agenda or ideology makes them interesting. In terms of how they're represented in the new codex, they are very, very interesting. They are not as whiz-bang powerful as, say, the Black Legion or the Word Bearers or the Iron Warriors, but they're all about dirty tricks, which makes sense because that's how they fight. They don't have any notion of honor. They're not interested in facing opponents that can mount a defense. Although they're very capable of doing so, they're not interested in that. They like weaker victims and opponents. Their Legion trait, Terror Tactics, is an interesting one. The Night Lords revel in spreading fear and mayhem and will take apart an opposing army piecemeal, dividing and isolating the weakest enemies so that their confused cries can be savoured before being swiftly and violently silenced. Okay, so the first part of this tactic, units with this trait have the following ability, Terror Tactics Aura. While an enemy unit is within 9 inches of this unit, subtract 2 from their leadership characteristic of models in that unit and subtract 1 from combat attrition tests taken for that unit. It's pretty good. It's not amazing, it doesn't have universal application, but it's something you need to use in conjunction with all the other stuff that the Night Lords can do. It's very good against armies that have low leadership and where attrition tests and leadership tests can be devastating. So things like Tyranids, for example, if you manage to wipe out the Synapse creatures, things like Astra Militaria that have very low leadership. Again, it suits the Night Lords because they're going for weaker, more, I don't want to say more cowardly armies, but armies that are more liable to break in the face of their terror tactics. It makes sense. It's the kind of thing that you can use to maneuver your opponent into very bad positions, especially in conjunction with certain Warlord traits, with certain relics and stratagems. The second part, each time a model with this trait makes an attack with a melee weapon, if that attack targets a unit that was below half strength when the attacking unit was selected to fight, or if that attack targets a unit that has a leadership characteristic of 5 or less, add 1 to that attack's wound roll. Again, it makes a lot of sense with regards to the Night Lords. It is very situational. You're gonna want to whittle the enemy down using your dirty tricks before you go and fight them in melee. And if you manage to do that, your units are gonna have great advantages, and that again suits the Night Lords. That's what they're all about. That's how they operate, and I quite like that. It is not the most powerful Legion trait, but they do make up for it with their stratagems and relics. It makes a lot of sense for the Night Lords, and I rather like it. Like all of them, they've got a secondary objective. Sow the seed or reap the fear. So, honouring the ways of their Primarch's reign of terror on ancient Nostramo, the Night Lords use fear as a weapon as much as bolter and blade, reaping a harvest of bewildered panic and frenzied screams that can bring a war-zone hive city or even an entire world to its knees. If you select this objective, score 1 victory point each time one of the following happens. An enemy unit fails a morale test, an enemy unit falls back, an enemy unit fails an action. So once again, in combination with terror tactics, that makes these criteria much more likely to happen. So there's a lot of synergy going on here. It's quite good. In addition, each time an enemy unit is destroyed by a melee attack made by a Night Lord's model from your army, before removing the last model in that enemy unit from the battlefield, roll 2d6. If the result equals or exceeds the leadership characteristic of that enemy model, score 1 victory point. Again, in conjunction with terror tactics, makes that much more likely. A model can, if it is resurrected for any reason, i.e. it was destroyed and subsequently returned to the battlefield, potentially contribute victory points due to the secondary objective several times, assuming it is resurrected and subsequently destroyed several times over, and your 2d6 result equals or exceeds that model's leadership characteristic each time. So it's very, very characteristic of the Night Lords. It works very well in conjunction with the Legion trait, the Warlord traits, the Stratagems, and the Relics, and it's quite achievable. It is quite achievable. It's not bad at all. Warlord traits are interesting because the Night Lords are all about the self, they're all about the individual. The Warlord traits are largely about the Warlord and no one else. They're not like, say, the Alpha Legion, which are largely all auras or about buffing your own units. They're about buffing the Warlord and no one else, because they're not inspiring figures, the Night Lords. Those who follow under the Night Lords Warlords hate them. They absolutely hate them because they're bastards. They're evil, cynical monsters, completely selfish, and the only reason they rule is because they have the strength and authority to do so. So that makes sense. Number 1, Night Haunter's Curse. Some Night Lords Warlords share the same curse of foresight that plagued their Primarch. Once per turn, you can change the result of a single advance roll, hit roll, wound roll, or saving throw made for this Warlord to be a 6. This counts as an unmodified 6 for all rules purposes. Can make the difference. It's really good. It can make the difference between your Warlord surviving and not, between your Warlord achieving an objective and not, between your Warlord slaying an enemy and or not. It's good. One piece at a time. This Warlord prefers to toy with his prey, striking hard and fast, then slipping through the foe's lines to strike from another unexpected angle, his injured and terrified victims completely at his mercy. Each time this Warlord is selected to fight, after it has finished making its attacks, if any enemy models were destroyed by those attacks, but their unit was not destroyed, select one of those enemy units. Until the end of the next morale phase, subtract 1 from combat attrition tests taken for that enemy unit. So it's fine. It basically makes it much more likely that the enemy will flee. Each time this Warlord makes a consolidation move, models in its unit can move in any direction and can do so even if they are already touching an enemy model, provided each model finishes its move within 3 inches of an enemy unit. So it basically enhances your Warlord and makes it much more likely that they can just take apart an enemy unit without them fleeing or falling back or whatever. It's quite good. 3. A Murderous Reputation. This is an aura. Even amongst the breed of murderers, this Warlord has gained a notorious reputation for his mastery of the killing art, such that his mere presence erodes the stoutest heart and robs stalwart warriors of their willingness to fight. While an enemy unit with the objective secured ability is within 6 inches of this Warlord, it loses that ability. Now that one is excellent. That is excellent. It means that you can maneuver and position your Warlord such that it makes it very difficult for the enemy to achieve their objectives. It's very, very good. In fact, that's probably the best one. 4. Killing Fury. This Warlord launches himself into the heart of enemy lines to slake his thirst for butchery. Each time this Warlord is selected to fight, if it made a charge move, was charged, or performed a heroic intervention this turn, until the fight is resolved, add die 3 attacks to the characteristic of this Warlord. Makes them much more killy. It's straightforward. Each time this Warlord makes a melee attack, it is considered to be engaged in wanton slaughter for that attack, instead of any other wanton act it is engaged in. Very good. It means that your Warlord's going to get exploding 6s regardless. So that can turn him into a monster. It's very good on Demon Princes, that one. Very good on Demon Princes. 5. One with the Shadows. So skilled at blending into darkness is this Warlord that it is difficult to discern where his corporeal form ends and the shadows begin. Each time an attack is made against this Warlord, your opponent cannot re-roll the hit roll. Subtract 1 from that attack's hit roll. It makes him much more survivable. It's good. It's good on an individual basis. 6. I like this one. Dirty Fighter. To this Warlord, the very notion of fighting fair is alien. He will use any dishonourable trick and underhand tactic there is to gain an advantage. At the start of the fight phase, you can select one enemy unit within 3 inches of this Warlord. That unit is not eligible to fight this phase until after all eligible units from your army have done so. Can be excellent. It's one of those Warlord traits that could make the difference in the key combat of the game, that could decide how that combat turns out, depending on how you play it. So it's pretty good. Now, the stratagems for the Night Lords are really where it's at. The stratagems and some of the relics are excellent. So in Midnight Clad, of course, it had to be in Midnight Clad. Having fought countless campaigns of terror in complete darkness, the Night Lords know how to make an ally of the shadows. Use this stratagem in your opponent's shooting phase when a Night Lord's infantry unit, excluding cultists, is selected as the target of a ranged attack. Until the end of the phase, each time a ranged attack is made against that unit, subtract 1 from the attack's hit roll. It's very characterful and it's very, very good. It makes your units a little bit more survivable in the early game and means that you can maneuver them with a bit more confidence. It's actually very, very good indeed, especially against the likes of Tau and Eldari and whatnot. Sound the Black Hunt. Isolated survivors and the meek of mind are favoured quarry of the 8th Legion. Use this stratagem in your shooting phase or the fight phase. When a Night Lord's Core, Night Lord's Demonkin, or Night Lord's character unit from your army is selected to shoot or fight. Until the end of the phase, each time a model in that unit makes an attack, if that attack targets a unit that was below its starting strength when the attacking unit was selected to shoot or fight, or it targets a unit that has a leadership characteristic of 6 or less, re-roll a hit roll of 1. Situational, but can be very, very good. Depending on where you are in the battle, this can make... Again, it's one of those situational stratagems, but that can make a difference. Second part, if that attack targets a unit that was below half strength when the attacking unit was selected to shoot or fight, or it targets a unit that has a leadership characteristic of 5 or less, you can re-roll the hit roll. Yeah, it's good. Again, it's the kind of stratagem that you want to play when you really need to take that unit down. That's when you want to play it. It's situational, but can be very, very good. Flay them alive. I like this one. Death does not always follow defeat. To the enemy's most influential champions, the Night Lords reveal their most sadistic talents. The victim's chilling screams broadcast to erode their allies' mettle. Use this stratagem in the fight phase. When the enemy Warlord is destroyed by a melee attack made by a Night Lord's Heretic Astartes model from your army. Until the end of the battle, each time a combat attrition test is taken for an enemy unit, subtract 1 from the combat attrition test. Now that is really good. It's an epic deed stratagem, and you've got to kill the enemy Warlord, so you've got to... There's a lot going on there to meet the criteria, but my god, if you do it, it afflicts the entire enemy army for the rest of the battle, and in conjunction with the Legion trait and everything else, it's really good. It's really damn good. Underhand scheming. The honourable fight is a laughable concept to the Night Lords, who employ darting strikes, feigned retreats, and all manner of dirty tactics to win the battle. Use this stratagem at the start of your charge phase. Select one Night Lords unit from your army. Until the end of the phase, that unit is eligible to declare a charge in a turn in which it fell back. It's pretty good. It's a feint. You can use it to sort of make your enemy believe you're doing one thing and then you're doing another. So it puts them on the hot foot. It's a dirty trick, and it's a good one. From the Night. The sons of Nostramo strike from the dark, outmaneuvering the foe in the murk of war before surging forward like blood-hungry spectres. Use this stratagem in the reinforcement step of your movement phase. Select one Night Lord's infantry or Night Lord's biker unit from your army that is either in strategic reserves or is a reinforcements unit that has not yet been set up on the battlefield. That unit can now be set up as if the battle round was one higher than it currently is, regardless of any mission rules. If that unit has the Demonkin keyword, this stratagem costs 2 command points. So it's expensive, but it's really good. I've not really ever seen a stratagem like this where you can treat the battle as being one round later for the purposes of reserves. That's excellent. Actually, that could be a really good. You can really disrupt the enemy's battle plan using that and gain yourself a significant advantage. It's one I would plan the use of because it is expensive, but boy, it's really very good indeed. Screaming Skies. The thrill of descending talons first into the terrified foe is addictive, and the hosts raptorial that accompany Night Lord's raids leap skyward to relive the visceral rush again and again. Use this stratagem at the start of your movement phase. Select one Night Lord's jump pack unit from your army and remove it from the battlefield. In the reinforcement step of your next movement phase, set up that unit anywhere on the battlefield that is more than 9 inches away from any enemy models. So it's a redeployment stratagem, and they're always really good. Again, you can perform feints with it. You can make your opponent believe you're going to do one thing, like claim an objective with a jump pack unit, and then take them off after they've responded to that to that feint and then do something else with them. It's pretty damn good. We have come for you. When the Night Lords descend, there is no mercy. Use this stratagem at the start of your opponent's movement phase. Select one Night Lord's Core, Night Lord's Demonkin, or Night Lord's character unit from your army. Until the start of your next turn, enemy units within engagement range of that unit cannot fall back unless they have the vehicle Titanic or aircraft keyword. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. Again, it disrupts your enemy. It puts them on the hot foot because suddenly you're controlling what they do. And that is very, very useful in 9th Ed. This is the one. This one is quite evil, I've got to say. This is a bit of an evil stratagem. Vox Scream. Hideous screams of an aggressive techno-virus infiltrate the communication systems of the target, temporarily rendering it incapable of command. Use this stratagem at the end of your movement phase. Select one enemy unit within 12 inches of a Night Lord's unit from your army. Until the start of your next movement phase, that unit loses all of its aura abilities. You can only use this stratagem once. Okay, it's only for one turn, but in the midst of the key combat that is going to decide the outcome of the battle, that can be an amazing stratagem. That's the kind of stratagem you plan an entire battle around, because there are armies that rely on their aura abilities. Tyranids, Eldari, most loyalist Space Marine armies rely on their aura abilities, so that is stunning. It can be the difference between winning or losing a battle, that one. The relics for the Night Lords are generally okay. There's one or two are amazing. One or two are really amazing. Most of them are just what you'd expect. They're upgrades. Claws of the Stygian Court is quite cool. Of the Stygian Count. This vicious taloned gauntlet has spilt the blood of thousands of victims since its creation for the infamous champion known as the Stygian Count. When plunged into flesh, nano-barbs slide out of each of the weapon's claws, tearing open cratered wounds when yanked out. So it's a weapon, but it's a very good one. The ones you want to watch out for are things like the Vox Demonicas. Emanating from the ornate winged helm in which it makes its home, this living susurrus haunts the airwaves, spreading lies and falsehoods across the Vox networks of the Night Lord's enemies. Night Lord's infantry model only, this relic can be given to a cultist unit. Enemy units that are set up on the battlefield as reinforcements cannot be set up within 12 inches of the bearer. That's friggin' excellent. That's friggin' excellent. So, where you position the bearer of the Vox Demonicas, you will control the battlefield and you will prevent your enemy placing his reserves units where they want them to be. It's very, very good indeed. Second part, the bearer is the following ability, Vox Demonicas Aura. Each time an enemy unit attempts to perform an action or a psychic action while within 12 inches of the bearer, roll 2d6. If the result is greater than the enemy unit's leadership characteristic, that unit cannot attempt to perform that action or psychic action. Again, it's brilliant. It's all about disruption. It's about making it very frustrating for the enemy, the opponent, to get their battle plan off. That's the kind of thing that the Night Lords are all about, and that's where your benefits lie in this army, that's for damn sure. What else have we got? The Scourging Chains, yeah, very Hellraiser. Again, it's a weapon, it's nice. Misery of the Meek is just an elixir that allows you to regain lost wounds, it's fine. Stormbolt Plate, it's a bit of armor that enhances your survivability. The relics generally are fine. All of them are useful, all of them are serviceable, but it's the Vox Demonicus that just completely sweeps all the others under the rug. You are going to want the Vox Demonicus because it allows you to control so much of the battlefield. It is actually excellent, especially in conjunction with certain Warlord traits that have a similar quality going on and certain stratagems that allow you to do similar things. It's all about disruption, and that's where you really want your focus to be with the Night Lords. They're not, as I say, they're not as overtly powerful as the Iron Warriors or the Black Legion or the Word Bearers, but they have some really nasty, dirty tricks that come into play with regards to the mission being played, the scenario being played, and certainly in the late game. That's kind of where they're really strong, when they manage to whittle the enemy down and manage to make them weak. That's where they shine, and they're so well represented. I mean, the role-playing elements of the Night Lords now are fabulous. They really feel like what they're supposed to be. and I can see them featuring in Chaos Space Marine forces quite a lot. Not least withstanding because they're so distinct and so interesting. I mean, they have that wonderful night blue armor with the lightning playing across it. They've got the Batwing thing motif going on. There's a lot going on for the Night Lords. They're a very interesting army hobby-wise, as well as in terms of the crunch of the game itself. So yeah, the Night Lords, they're back again. After quite a few editions of being one of the lesser legions, I'd say they're pretty damn good this time around. Subtle, but good. Right, next time, my loves, I'll either try and do the Red Corsairs again, because I was actually really pleased with the recording I did until I realised that it had cocked up, or I might do the World Eaters, because the World Eaters have got an Index Astartes article in White Dwarf that it's a get-you-by army list that works with this codex, so I might do them, or I might go on to the Emperor's Children. We shall see. Until then, my loves, bye-bye!